Hello. Today let's talk about some drip rates. As you know, drip rates have to be in that darn Latin gute or GTT per second. So let's start right off by defining our Latin here. The Latin for gutta is singular, gute is plural, and all it means is drop or drops. That's what it means, drops of fluid. So the next piece you want to think about is, what are your primary IV sets? Okay, you go to your cupboard, you find your primary IV set. Does that set state on it somewhere in writing that it's a 10, a 15, or a 60? I want a different color. Hang on, there we go. And you just need to pick which set. Maybe you only have one set. That's okay. We can deal with that. Maybe you have multiple to choose from. Okay, now we need to figure out what we're going to choose from, but at least know that each set that you can purchase will have a different drop per mil on that set. So you got to read your sets and figure out, of my primary IV sets, what is what and which one am I grabbing. And then with drip rates, you want to memorize your equation. The mil per hour times your drops per mil, which is your primary IV set, divided by 60 minutes, divided by 60 seconds per minute, will get you, I'm sorry, this should be 60 minutes in an hour, my bad. And why does it have to be in an hour? Great question, because when you get to the very end of drips per second, and when you're doing algebra, you know everything has to somehow cross out, right? So if we have hour here and hour here, those will cross out. Minutes will cross out, mils will cross out, and you're left with the drips per second, which is what you're looking for. So when you are studying this equation, make sure you're memorizing it correctly. It's super easy on this equation to memorize it incorrectly. And that's probably why I got this question wrong every single time on the VTNE, because at some point, instead of writing per hour, I wrote per minute. Or instead of minutes per hour, I just wrote minutes. As you can see, I just did on this equation. So if you want to set yourself up for success, write out this equation correctly 100 times, 1,000 times, whatever it takes. But the equation has to be correct in your brain before you can successfully manage these questions. So that's where I would start, is just get that thing in your brain. Okay, and now let's break down the equation. What does it mean? So this first piece, the GTT per second, that's what the answer needs to be. So that's my x. That is my unknown variable. I have no idea what that's going to be. That is something that I have to figure out from the equation. The mil per hour here in orange, that's the DVM orders. So when they give you a piece of paper, that dreaded Post-it note that just has random scribbles on it, they're going to tell you what mil per hour they want on this pet. And that's probably all they're going to give you. So there you go. That's what we get. And within that equation, again, it's going to be times our drips per mil. That's in the green. Drips per mil is the IV set, your primary IV set, which is either in 10 or 15 or 60. Now I know there's some other drip sets out there. These are the ones I'm most used to. These are the ones that I find we can get a hold of very easily. So again, you go to your cupboard and you have to figure out drips per mil on your IV set. You have to grab the right one. How do I know which one's the right one? Well, 10 drips per mil is usually for a large creature. 15 is usually for a medium creature, and 60 is for a small creature. How do you know this? Well, think it out a little bit. Think about, if I only need 10 drips of water, and that will equal 1 mil of fluid into my little mil bucket here. Well, that was big fat drops. 10 big fat drops to fill up that bucket. Okay, those are some big fat drops. Conversely, if we look down here, 60 tiny drops that will somehow fill up the exact same 1 mil bucket. Those are tiny drops. So tiny drops are obviously, well, maybe not obviously, but those would be safer for your small creatures. The tiny dogs, the cats, the guinea pigs, the iguanas, what have you. That's probably safer for them. The 10 drops, these big fat drops that fill up a mill bucket real quick, that's your Labradors, that's your St. Bernards, that's the big guys. And maybe you work with cattle. That's great for cattle too. All right, so we got those bits. And then we look at the other pieces. So 60 minutes per hour, that's conversion rate number 1. And 60 seconds per minute, that's conversion rate number 2. So what does that mean? That means you memorize your conversion rates. Those are set in stone. Those never change. So what pieces do you really need to pay attention to? You need to pay attention to the orange piece, the mil per hour, which is your DVM orders, and your drips per mil in the green here, which is your primary IV set. Okay, those are the pieces you have to have somebody else give to you. Whether it is the doctor or you going to the cupboard and discovering which primary IV sets you have, those are the pieces that have to be given to you. Otherwise, 60 minutes in an hour, we know that's a conversion rate that never changes. 60 seconds in a minute, that's another conversion rate. That never changes. Great. Okay, we got all those pieces. Then we go back down here, and again, we write this out correctly 100 times, 1,000 times, whatever it takes, so that we do not forget it when it comes to our test. Because as long as you have all of these pieces written out correctly, you cannot make a mistake on that test. So let's discover why. Here's our question. A DVM orders a fluid rate, fluid rate of 250 mils per hour of 0.9% saline on a 68-pound Labrador. You have a 15 drop per mil set. What will the rate be? Now, right off the bat, there's a whole lot of information in this that you don't need. Okay? Which pieces do you know you need? Which pieces do you not need? All right, so first thing you need to do, write out that equation. Write it out, write it out, write it out. We already know the GTT per second, that's an X. X equals what? Okay? The mils per hour, remember that has to come from a doctor. So the doctor said 250 mils an hour. Fabulous, look at that, I got my first chunk. Excellent. And then drips per mil, we know that comes from going to my cupboard and figuring out what set do I have. The equation already told you you've got a 15 drip per mil set. Fabulous. Times 15 drips per mil. That's all you need. So the VTNE purposely puts in things like 0.9% saline and 68 pounds. Why do they do this? Because everybody gets tripped up on 0.9% saline because we have been trained that percent equals grams over 100 mils, and we have been trained that we have to figure that out. Not in this equation. Because as soon as they say drips per mil, as soon as they say that as part of your equation, you know it is this. You know it's this equation. It is not that equation. Also, 68 pounds. Again, we've been trained over and over and over again. 68 has to be divided by 2.2 to get kigs. No. Nowhere in this equation is there anything about pounds or kilograms. So this is an irrelevant piece of information. It's meant to throw you off. But once you see drips per mil set, they're talking about a primary IV set, you go, ha! It is this equation. And then you start figuring out, okay, now what do I need to do? How do I figure this out? Let's get rid of some of this excess nonsense I've written here. All right. So the two pieces that you don't know, right, that are not conversion, we've just put in my equation. We divide all of this by 60 minutes per hour. You make sure it's in brackets because whatever's in brackets goes first. And that's divided by 60 seconds per minute. Fabulous. Now we go to our calculator. 250 times 15, because you're right, you always do the top pieces of your equation first. Okay, and you get an answer. And then that's going to be divided by 60. Fabulous. Now we've done everything in the brackets, and the only thing left outside of the brackets is this piece, also divided by 60. And you are left with 1.0416 repeating. And that's going to be the answer of GTT per second. Again, memorize this. Because when you take that answer and you look up here, I have GTT per second, I have mil per hour, I have GTT per second, I have mil per second. They're going to do that to you. They're going to put in any and all units that they feel will trip you up. But you're not going to be tripped up because you've memorized this equation. You know the answer is always in drips per second. You're also going to be smart enough to go, well, 1.041, that's a ridiculous number. Nobody can count 1.0416 drips per second. What makes lots more sense is just rounding this to 1 drip per second. Round it to 1 drip per second. Fabulous. Now we look and see which one of these is the answer. 1 is not 62. A is not the answer. 1 is not 48. That is not the answer. Here's 1, and it has the right units. Drips per second. Okay, fabulous. So that's probably the answer. But don't stop there. These questions are meant to trip you up. So let's look at the last one. It also has 1. And I got a 1. But it says mils per second. We are not calculating, the unit we have is not mil per second. It's drops per second. So that is not the answer. Great. 1 drip per second, 1 drip per second. We got it. That's where you go with these questions. Okay, let's try another one. A DVM orders are for a 7-pound cat to get 28 mils per hour. You have a 60 drip per mil primary IV set of 1 liter of LRS. All right, so you've read it out. You see this, and you go, aha, this is the equation I'm going to write down. Then, let's look at the pieces that we need to fill in. My doctor, forgive me for putting out that R, there it is, mils per hour. Doctor said they want this. Perfect, that actually fills right in. So we've got an X equals 28 mil per hour, because that's literally part of my equation. And then you have to take that times your drips per mil. That's your IV set. How many drops will fill up 1 milliliter of fluid? And you have that. They put that in the equation, and that's your trigger to write down this equation. So here I've got 60 drips per mil. And remember, those are the only 2 pieces you need. You divide the whole thing by a conversion. 60 minutes in an hour. Place that big chunk in a bracket, because we do that first. And then outside of that is also divided by another conversion rate, 60 seconds in a minute. Okay, got all those bits. Now we find for X. So we've got 28 times 60. Because again, the top of that bracket goes first. Then we're going to divide by 60. Now we've done everything in the brackets, so now we can move outside the brackets, which is divided by 60. Fabulous. Now we have an answer of 0.46 repeating drips per second. All right. So if my answer is 0.46 drips per second, and let's get rid of some of these darn extra pieces that are screwing it up. I'm going to look over here. Start with my number, 0.46. Yep, 0.46. Uh-oh, yep, also yep. 0.46. Oh, crap, all of them are 0.46. Well, now what do I do? Well, you know what to do. Does it say drips per second? And don't let this question trip you up, because look at what they do. Drips per hour or drips per second? Or if you're going too fast, like I always did with these questions, I would see 0.46 and I'd say it was A. I move on. Bam, I'm done. I think I have the answer. No, I don't, because I didn't read my units. It's not mil per hour. Mil per hour is something you get when you put in your IV set into the pump. The IV pump gives you mils per hour. Okay? You know mil per second is not the answer, and you know drops per hour. I mean, think about that. Are you really going to sit there and watch the thing drip how many drops in 1 hour to get the right answer? Good God, I hope not. You're going to be sitting there for many hours adjusting your drips to get to an out. No. It is drips per second. So for this one, D is your answer. Now, if you're smart, you're saying, why the heck would we have 0.46? Wouldn't it make more sense to round up to 0.5? Right? A half a drop per second, which you really can't count, but could you count one drip in 2 seconds? Yes, you can. This is a much more accurate answer that I would do in clinic. I cannot guarantee that the VTNE is going to give you that type of mental gymnastics. They might, but I definitely remember a question where the drips were just straight up whatever the answer was when I did the math. They were not asking me to think ahead. They were not asking me to use my common sense, which this is common sense. They just wanted the straight up answer. So all of that, and they might actually try to do this to you. I don't know. But this is how we get through these questions so we are not confused by the words. Again, if we go back up here, 7 pounds. We have been so trained that pounds must be converted, and it somehow has something to do with something. And then they tell me it's 1 liter. Oh, poop, what does that mean? Do I need to figure out 1 liter or a half liter? How does that? It does not apply because your trigger words in this equation are the drips per mil, which means you are doing a drip rate equation. You are doing a drip rate equation, which leads you to this fancy equation here. That is what you're trying to accomplish with these questions. I hope that made sense. Thanks for listening.